Hey guys, there have been some big updates in the Richard Allen case, and I want to talk to you about that. Let's get this up here a little larger. He's awaiting trial right now for the murders of Libby German and Abby Williams at the Monon High Bridge, which you see on the screen here. Abby walking there with a picture that Libby took, and then the person who abducted them from a video they took only a few minutes later. So pretty explosive stuff came out in this filing that the defense made, and we'll get into it. You got a cult, you got ritual sacrifice, human sacrifice, you got all kinds of things. Is the defense just blowing smoke, or is there something to this? So what they filed was a motion for a Franks hearing, and what they're asking the judge to do is throw out the search warrant and suppress the evidence that the search warrant was for the home and vehicle of Richard Allen. So that's what's sparking all this. If you read this thing, it's well over 100 pages. You think, well, they're trying to get him off completely, right? They're talking about the whole case. And that's okay, but just remember, for the legal purposes, all they're really doing here is asking the judge to say that the police deceived the prior judge to get a search warrant for his home and car. And so the judge should find that the evidence should be suppressed, whatever was found from that. Now, I know there were some clothes and also the firearm, which was linked by the lab to the round found at the scene. Whether you think that's important evidence or not, the point is, if they were to win this motion, I think that would just be gone because the firearm would be out and the clothes to it. But maybe other things. We don't know what all they got in that search warrant, whether there's real evidence there or not. But the defense is making the most of it by putting basically their entire case, I think, out in front of everybody. Very interesting to see it, because they reveal for the first time a lot of what was at the crime scene, or at least what they say was at the crime scene. Let me drop this logo off of here. Sorry about that. So that we can see more of this. All right, cool. And they're talking about what occurred at the crime scene. What was found by the police resembled a ritual, which we'll get into more specifically, but for purposes of right now, related to Odinites, or the worship of Odin. And a long time ago, at least according to research, the Vikings would occasionally do some kind of human sacrifice. Certainly you see that in movies and things. And now there are adherents to that, or at least people who say they are. There's people who believe, think, or will do anything. So I'm not surprised that there are like that. And you see in the middle of this ruin, it looks like an F. And they say that was present at the scene, painted in blood. So was this a case of human sacrifice and some extreme ritual related to Odin? That's what the defense says. And of course, they say Richard Allen has nothing to do with any of that. So let's get into this a little bit. And at least, it's 100 and some pages long. I read through it pretty quickly, and I wanted to burn it down to how I see the state's case and then how the defense rebuts this. But of course, the state will have something to say about this too, because critical to what the defense is saying is how they characterize the crime scene. Will the state agree with that and say, yes, these things were deliberately there, these things were deliberately done? Or will they say, no, you're making too much of it? And we'll talk about that in a minute. So this is the Franks hearing request, and in it, the defense sets out these kind of arguments. The police lied to the judge to get the search warrant. That's really what they need to say, is there was material information withheld from the judge that if the judge knew it, the judge wouldn't have granted the search warrant. So throw out all the evidence that came out of that, whatever it may be. The firearm we know about, and there could be other things as well. In the course of their brief, or their memorandum supporting their motion, they say that Allen was not on or near the bridge at 2:13. In fact, they say he's pretty much gone at 1:30. And if he is, that's really important. And that the murder scene, the crime scene, indicates behavior associated with persons other than Allen, these Odinite people. And they say, hey, Allen's not one, hasn't been one, isn't associated with that, doesn't believe in it, and doesn't hang around with people like that. So if it were an Odin ritual-based crime scene, that would point away from Allen. I get that logic. And that Allen's confession statements, his inculpatory statements, well, those were due to pressure from guards who were themselves Odinites potentially, and his general mental decline from being in such a hardcore prison. So obviously, since he's apparently has admitted involvement in the killings, it's important on them to say that's not really true, because that's bad if it is true for their case. Now, remember, he's charged with felony murder, and that's something that disappears in the defense brief and probably in everybody's mind. But it's an important nuance for this case. He's not charged with the actual killing of the girls. He's charged with felony murder, which means he may have killed them, but all they really have to show is that he committed a felony that led to their death, And that would be the kidnapping, the taking the girls off the bridge down to the murder scene where they were killed either by him or somebody else. That's what the state is trying to say. So the state still has to prove that. They have to prove that he's the one who did it, because there's no question the girls were murdered. The defense doesn't contend otherwise. And there's no real question that girls were kidnapped from the bridge. I don't think the defense is contending against that either, although some weirdos on the internet are. To the credit of the defense, they are not. All right. So the whole key of this case against Alan is kidnapping at the bridge and the down the hill thing, right? But it is important what happened to the crime scene, to whether he's connected to it or not, and what happened before the abduction in terms of whether he was located there or not. That's all critical stuff. So I say the key facets of the state case, at least in my mind, are this: his presence or not at the bridge at the time of abduction. Obviously important. If he's gone home at 1:30, left the scene, he's unlikely to be the guy at the bridge at 2 o'clock, right? And then they're going to tell you why they say that. Whether he was at the crime scene itself. So, okay, so if he's on the bridge, is he the one who took the girls down to where the murders occurred, or at least close to it? That's important. And then was he actually involved with the killings themselves, which of course everybody wants. The real killers, the people who actually did it, should face some punishment. And whether that's him or somebody else, or him and somebody else, whatever it is, we all want it solved. And if it's not him, we don't want him to pay for it. It's an injustice if he's not. But if he is, hopefully the truth will come out either way. So let's talk about the first of those, presence at the bridge at the time of abduction. So Alan sees 3 teens, and they see him, or at least a man, and that's the implication you get, as he's entering the trail, because he tells the Department of Natural Resources guy, yeah, I saw 3 girls there. Well, 3 girls also said, well, we saw 1 guy there, and they didn't see another guy, and he didn't see other girls. So it makes sense that it's them. And they saw him around at about 1:30, because they took a picture of the bench as they're getting near the end of the trail to leave, and it was timestamped 1:26 on the phone. Shortly thereafter, they see this guy, and of course, Alan sees the girls at some point. And if that's him, which it makes sense that it is, then that all makes sense. He's coming into the trail, though, at that point. He's not leaving it. He's coming into it around 1:30. And Department of Natural Resources guy, his notes with his Alan interview says he was on the trail 1:30 to 3:30. So that's the state's case, that he's getting on the trail around 1:30, and it's backed up with at least some objective evidence, the timestamp of the bench. Now, people are going to argue about it because the girls kind of describe the guy differently and all that. I hear all of that, but we've gone through that in other videos. So if you think it wasn't him that they saw at all, okay, I hear that. But remember, he said he saw 3 girls. So come on, it only stands to reason. But if you want to dispute it, that's your pleasure. We're all just trying to analyze the case. But however, if he is on that trail at 1:30 going down toward the bridge, it's unlikely that there is another male involved in this situation. And we've gone through that in other prior videos, because it kind of gets captured inside of these reducing boxes of witnesses and time frames, so that the female who ends up coming onto the scene, walking down to the bridge, and sees somebody staying on the bridge, with Alan having seen no other male and her having seen no other male, that person is likely Alan. Okay. And again, we're going to get to the defense points on this, but that's really important, because you have the girls up there at the top left of the blue seeing Alan coming onto the trail at 1:30, or what we believe, or I believe, to be Alan. And then later on, you see the sole individual male on the bridge just before, minutes before the abduction, with the woman turning around, heading back, and seeing the 2 girls heading down to the bridge. So whoever was on the bridge at that time is likely the abductor. Was it Alan or not? That's important. The timeline as it stands right now suggests that it likely was. Of course, the defense doesn't concede that. So here's some counter arguments they have. Alan goes into this police interview in October of 2022 and talks to the police and says, I was on the trail between, say, noon and 1:30. So he's gone by around 1:30, he says. And if he's gone at 1:30 and headed away, then he's not the guy on the bridge later. So that would be pretty sweet if it's true. The female, they say, who saw the male on the bridge minutes before the abduction, and that's a critical witness, right? The person she described was dissimilar to Alan, doesn't match Alan. Well, that would go toward Alan too, right? The female then leaves, right? And I think she saw Libby and Abby, likely, and gets in her car and leaves, and sees a car parked at the old CPS building, which is where Alan says he had parked. But she describes a car that is not black. His is black. And it was an old 60s Comet, whereas his was a more reasonable but still old Ford Focus. They don't look the same. We'll see pictures of it. And then they say, hey, the DNR guy, Dan, if he knew that the girls were killed somewhere around or abducted somewhere around 2 o'clock, he might have written down a range there. Hey, were you on the trail at 1:30? And when Alan says, yeah, 1:30 makes sense to me, then he might have written down 1:30 to 3 or 3:30 or whatever he wrote, I think 3:30, without confirming to Alan that he had actually stayed till 3:30. But the evidence doesn't say that. That's a supposition on their part. So Alan tells the police in October that last year that he was on the trail 12 to 1:30. So still an hour and a half. That's a considerable amount of time. And it's also likely that if he were on the trail during that time frame, he would have seen the girls somewhere else other than at the end of the trail while he's on his way in, right? And they would have seen him on the trail somewhere, likely. So to me, the cell phone timestamp of the girls at 1:26 p.m. and the mutual statements of the girls and Alan that they saw one guy, he sees 3 girls. That makes it more likely that the original scenario to me is true, that he's entering the trail around 1:30. And that's what was recorded on the notes by DNR Dan, that he was on the trail from 1:30 to 3:30. So that's not just Dan making a range by itself. It's also supported by the timestamp cell phone data. And Alan wouldn't have known of that when he was telling the police that I was leaving at 1:30, even though the girl saw him coming at 1:30. So to me, they don't get over the hump of destroying the timeline. Okay. They don't have to destroy it. They have to raise reasonable doubt. And I get that. But I'm saying I'm not buying his argument to the police in October of last year is conclusive, because by then he also knows he needs to be gone by then pretty much. So he would have a reason to remember it differently. Also, it was years ago. So I'm looking at the evidence that was taken near the time of the crime. And that is the 1:26, the girls and Alan's testimony back then. And to me, that makes it likely he was coming into the trail. That doesn't mean he did it, of course. It's just one aspect of the case. But here's another one where they spend a lot of time on, which is the female who saw the male on the bridge minutes before the abduction. I mean, that's pretty important, right? She described somebody that didn't match Alan. She said, and maybe at one point she said the guy was around 20 and boyish, but they also say that the defense that she said 20 to 30s and with poofy hair. And so if you look on the screen here, you'll see these 2 sketches. And the sketch on the left was released first, but it was from a different witness who saw somebody walking down the road. And it took a long while before they released the sketch over on the right, which is from the woman who saw the person on the bridge. And then people say, well, that doesn't look like Richard Allen. It's got this hair and look at the face and everything. But of course, we all know eyewitness testimony is to some degree limited. And that's not a reason to put a guy in jail. And it's not necessarily a reason to let a guy out. It's a reason to respect the limits of that. But doesn't it depend a little bit on which picture you look at? So take this sketch. I think it's on the left on your screen, but the guy with the hat on. And then look at the picture next to it of Richard Allen. Well, they look kind of similar, right? It's also true if you put that picture up against a lot of people that live around there, it's also going to look similar. But now look at the sketch on the right, and that's the one that the defense says, hey, that doesn't look like Alan. But look at the picture of Alan next to that. That looks pretty similar to me there too, right? Isn't it weird? Because those 2 sketches don't look like the same person. But if you just look at a picture of Alan and then the sketch in each of those situations, to me, they are fairly similar. Not anywhere remote to conclusive. I don't mean that. But what I do mean is their contention that the sketch doesn't look like Alan at all. I don't see that when I look at that sketch, say, next to this other picture of him. I mean, the eyes, everything looks different there, right? But that's him. That's a picture of him, and he looks like that guy in a sketch. So this one does not blow it out of the woods for me either, that it's not him, nor does it tell me that it is him by itself. But what about this car? This is a little different here because, I got a picture of a Focus on there and an old Comet. And apparently the woman said the car was angular and stuff. And that's, what's going on there? Did she remember the right car at the right building and all that? If she did, and Alan's car were parked there, the black car, and now it's gone, somebody took it, right? And the defense is going to say, well, yeah, Alan took it because he left the scene. And if you want to say, well, you got to believe what this woman says, and it was a Comet there and his car is gone, then you have to start speculating he had accomplices move his car and other things like that. And, if it was a multiple person thing, I suppose that's possible that somebody else was, in his car and then took it somewhere else so that they could, get closer to the crime scene. But that's an evidence-free conjecture. There's no evidence of that at this point. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to say the defense has a good point here in that if you think this is important from the eyewitness that these cars are this much different, then the prosecution has some real explaining to do here, right? I guess in my view, I don't put as much on it as I do the fact that they have this time-stamped cell phone time frame of 126 and the three girls seeing the one guy and the one guy seeing the three girls. They're right next to each other on a bridge. So their timing is right there with each other. And that's the time that he had told DNR Dan, or at least was recording his notes. That's when he was coming on the trail. So to me, it'd be more likely that the woman messed up the description of the car or some other reason for it than that he wasn't coming onto the trail around 1:30. However, still, it's a point for the defense because the car thing to me is inconsistent. The sketch, not so much, but the car thing, a little more there. I don't know how an old Comet that's not black looks like a Focus that is black. I can see, when I go walking around and stuff, I don't really remember cars that people are parking unless I have some reason to do it. So I don't know about that, but I would put my money, at least on this aspect of things, that the timestamp matters a lot in terms of timing, and the sighting of the girls to the one guy and the one guy to the three girls, which that's Alan saying he saw three girls, that trumps the rest of this. That's just my opinion. Yours can be different. You don't have to get mad about it. Now let's talk about presence at the crime scene. Well, for the state's case first, they have found an unspent .40 caliber round between the girls, and it has extraction marks that the lab says match Alan's P226. Yeah, we'll talk about the potential weakness of that evidence in a minute. This is the state side. The video reveals that the abductor brandished a firearm, so that happened, and they weren't shot. They were ended up being, cut with a knife. So Alan says no one borrowed his gun and he hadn't gone to that area of the crime scene. So there's no alternate reason for that round to get there other than, he put it there and was not one to tell the police that. If, of course, you believe this is a match. And the defense does not agree with that. So their counter argument is that the lab match of the round, that's subject to serious dispute because of the subjective nature of the lab technician's conclusions. They're experts. That he's looking at this round with these extraction marks on it and then comparing it to other rounds out of Alan's gun and saying this came out of the same gun. We haven't seen that comparison. So we don't even know whether there's something super distinctive about his gun or whether maybe the subjective or subjective opinion is grasping at straws a little bit. Okay. So we just don't know whether this evidence is going to be really good or really bad or whatever. It's evidence. It's right for the defense to dispute it, of course. I don't think it's fair to say now that it's overwhelmingly positive for him or overwhelmingly should be ignored because you haven't seen it. So there are some cases, sure, where I would say this is too thin. And maybe this is one of them. Like this match is not very persuasive to me. You haven't shown me the difference between how an extraction mark looks coming out of his gun to another P226. You could have a jury conclude, I'm not going to pay any attention to this guy, but you could also see it's very distinctive, different than other 226s. Maybe something had happened to his extractor or whatever, and it could be very compelling. We don't know, but so for right now, I think that's up in the air. That's why you have a trial. They also make an argument I think is kind of ridiculous, which is the deep river argument. He's only 5'4", they say several times in their memo, and this river at times is up to 3.5 feet deep. So, is it realistic that he would cross it while abducting these girls? I mean, yeah, because it doesn't mean he stepped in the deepest part of it. And also, they made it across it. Were they headed to the WNBA after this and never made it? I mean, it's two teenage girls. If they can get across the creek/river, then he could do it too. So that to me is not very compelling. Now, what is a little different is they say the crime scene indicates likely more than one person. And the state has also supported that theory. And that's one reason why they have him charged with felony murder. And then they even said it out loud before. So the defense is getting a little up here from the state, because if you believe there was more than one person involved and you want to put Alan as part of this team of killers, well, where are the other killers? Or at least where are the people he associated with that could be the killers? Like, how did he come out of nowhere, never hurting anybody that we know of, and team up with people to murder these girls and then do it in such an extravagant, crazy, ritualized manner? Because the defense says that the crime scene indicates rituals associated with Odinism, and Alan's not associated with it, they say, or with other people who are. If all of that's true, it's making you wonder, okay, there's maybe a really bad timeline for this guy, but on the other hand, if he didn't do it by himself, who are these other mystery actors, and how's he connected to any of this? And we don't see that yet. So I get what they're saying. They're also basically saying that he wasn't involved at all, that there are alternate people who should be suspects in this case. So they have complete counter theories that they're going with. So they say the bizarre crime scene indicates Odin rituals. Alan wouldn't kidnap and bring girls to Odinites. He doesn't know, right? And that is weird. Like, why would this grown man be delivering girls for a ritual human sacrifice if he doesn't know anything about it or the people who are going to do it? And if he did, where's the connection? So I think what matters here is the defense characterization of the crime scene accurate? Because we'll go over some specifics about it. But I know a long time ago when I did a little bit in this, one of the aspects of ritualized killings or crimes was knowing what to look for to find out if that's what it was, but then also knowing enough to not see it when it wasn't really there. This twig was like this pentagram was here. Did that really mean that was a Satan person doing this? Because there was a period of time when everything was a cult killing, everything was satanic. So I don't know that the state's going to agree or not. I think that matters, and hopefully we'll see their response to this. But nevertheless, we're looking at what the defense has said here, so let's see what they say. So this is the first time we really get a description of this crime scene. It is awful. The girls' throats were cut. That's not surprising from things that have been out there before. One of the victims was laid nude with one arm to a tree, and then above it, a symbol similar to an F was painted in her blood. And I've got a picture here in case it is this ruin. That's what it looks like, basically an F, and blood all over this victim. Then they say this victim was covered deliberately with arranged branches, a V, and then a branch going across and one coming up the side, which they associate with a ruin, as some kind of ritual symbol associated with Odinism. Is it? Is it not? I'm not an expert on it, but I hear what they're saying. Then the other victim is a very bizarre situation, given how the first one presents. She's in mostly her own clothes, but then also dressed in the clothes of her nude friend, who's also the victim, right? So what's going on with that? And she had little blood on her, none on the clothes. And then as she was on the ground, sticks had been placed deliberately around her head, like it was a horns or antlers or something. And then branches deliberately placed on her body in kind of an asterisk formation. Was this a random and they're just seeing this, or was it really looking like this? Given law enforcement has said there was staging, I'm kind of leaning to the defense that maybe this is an accurate depiction of the crime scene, but I still want to see what the state has to say, of course. But still, this sounds very bizarre, and it's very particular by the defense with the items they're pointing out. So I would think they'd have to be supported by the pictures the judge is seeing. And it's likely the victims were moved from the murder area to the staging area, at least a short distance. So this is really weird, right? And I guess in my opinion, the normal motive for something like this, and at least this is what I would have thought, is that sexual assault, right? And then you kill the person to prevent them from being a witness and turning you in. Or do you want to kill the person? That's what you like. Or maybe you like both, right? But this is different. A great deal of effort was expended here on a different objective. And it was to create a scene based on a fantasy, maybe this cult belief. It took a lot of forethought and a lot of time and a lot of effort. If this was all done, and it sounds like it was, the defense is right, I think, to say that, this was a major part of what was found there. This is really important to the mindset of whoever committed this crime. And there's no evidence that Alan had this fantasy that I'm aware of, or that he was connected to people who did. There is some evidence that others involved in Odinism would know, like ruins like this, and maybe some woods tree rituals and blood on the ruins and blood on the trees. That kind of stuff is out there, and maybe sacrifice. And so if there were multiple people, even if there are people like that, where's the Alan connection to that? I don't know. Now, the involvement in the killings, confessions while imprisoned, that's really big. It's the only bullet point that you have to have when you have this other circumstantial evidence, right? So the defense says, hey, look, those type of statements were made due to his mental decline. And also, there were guards there pressuring him, and some of those guys would wear Odin patches, which is truly bizarre if true. Okay, so that's weird. No physical evidence that he killed the girls, right? And no physical evidence anybody else did that we're aware of either. There's really nobody who's identified as the person wielding the knife. They say, hey, look, the crime scene details do not connect to him or anything he'd expressed in his life. And that it took more than one person to do it. So if he wasn't the one coming up with these ruins things, he'd have to be associated with somebody who would. And it would have to be planned out that somebody goes on a bridge, gets the girls, takes them down to this area, and they're already, they know what they want to do when they get down there. So I get all that. I'm not fully convinced that that had to be more than one person, but I do see the logic of it being more than one person because it took a lot of time and effort, right, to do this. And even the state seems to think, yeah, we're probably more than one person. And maybe if you knew more about the scene, and I'm not saying that we should, you'd think more strongly one way or the other. I mean, you could do it if you're one person, but man, would you be spending a lot of time down there? And if you're going to do all that by yourself and spend the extra time to do it, this fantasy must be really important to you, right? To arrange the scene this way and to leave it this way and to have that into your mind and memorialize it however you're going to. You're risking getting caught at any moment. And this fantasy of the presentation of the scene looks to me like the other things, maybe like the killing and stuff, was a means to get to this fantasy or to justify the killing or whatever, but a critical part of it. So, one person could do it, but why would Alan want to do these things to these girls, particularly one of them treated substantially differently than the other? I don't know the reason for that. And I think it's good for the defense to explore it. That doesn't mean that I'm buying whole cloth. There are allegations against other people. I don't know the answers to that, and the state will have to respond to that. Did they look into these people? Were they excluded for better reasons than the defense is willing to admit? Because the defense has blown over some of the evidence in this case like it doesn't exist when it clearly does. They may have done that in some areas. Other areas, just like the state doesn't want to talk about the weaknesses in its case, it wants to talk about the strengths. So here's my summary of this thing, because we've been going at it for quite a while now. This defense brief at well over 100 pages, it's way too long. And often in it, it's making emotional and kind of sarcastic arguments. And it blows by important evidence in the case, aspects of the timeline with the teen witnesses and Alan seeing them and the timestamp. His confessions are just, oh, well, he went crazy then and he was threatened, but there's no evidence of that yet, right? And how are they going to get evidence in of that if he does want to say it? Looking at waiving the fifth? I don't know. And the bullet is left more, I think, to the other motion. They just kind of calling it a magic bullet. But they blow by all that like it's nothing, and it isn't nothing. Whether it's enough or not is different, but it's not nothing. And, these guys are appointed sometimes, often appointed attorneys get a bad rap for that. They don't work very hard or they're not smart enough or whatever. And that's can be true in any kind of attorney situation or anything in life. But these guys are working this case pretty hard. I think you have to give them that, even if you don't agree with the things they're saying or doing here. You have to respect what they're trying to do, which is zealously represent their client, explore all the avenues of the case. And I think they have some points here when they talk about multiple assailants, and it indicates pre-planning and a staging is a likely goal of the killing. And then where's the connection of Alan to these people? He's according to the state, the point person who's willing to go on the bridge in public and abduct these girls while the other people are unseen and then take them there to be killed. If he's doing that, he has to be part of this group of assailants, right? He has to have some connection to them. And where is that? And why hasn't he explored some kind of deal or whatever? And if he was confessing on the phone, why didn't he tell his wife, well, it was me and so or whatever, instead of just taking the blame himself? So those are some interesting things to think about. I think this whole staging thing is a big wrench in it for me that I've got to process more. I just don't have some clarity in my mind that I'd like to have for what I really think it means for the mental aspects of Alan in this case. And not that I'm necessarily buying what all the defense says, but it's a door they've opened that I think is going to require walking through and exploring some. And of course, Alan's car being gone, I think is a good point they've raised, an inconsistency in the witness statement. Some of the other points they raise, like he can't walk across the river, or this sketch doesn't look like him when it depends on which picture you choose. Those don't resonate with me, but these other things are very interesting. So at this point, I think the case is deserving a lot of analysis, and the state will respond to this. I hope it's public so that we can see it for people who are interested in the case, because the defense has raised some good points. And the state can respond to that, and we'll see whether, did the defense mislead us here and the state actually did do this, or the state didn't close this and it needs to look into more. I mean, there are mysteries in this case. Even if you buy everything the state had to say, it's still an open question in their case, who actually killed these girls and why did they do it, even with the case against Alan. And those are always obviously extremely important questions that deserve some answers to. Now, if he's confessed to it, maybe he did do it by himself, but there's so much unknown. We don't even know what he said in these alleged confessions, and we don't know all the evidence in either direction, that it's hard to say conclusively. I mean, it's been my opinion that based on the evidence that's out in public, he's likely the guy who did it. And this defense brief doesn't change my mind in terms of the timeline, really, but it does open, I think, some important doors here, particularly on the nature of the crime scene and Alan's connection to it. That deserves some thinking. It's not like judges getting ready to hand the case to the jury. There's plenty of time to think about it and be open-minded and consider what the evidence is. So they don't flip me around on my overall feeling of the case, but they've got my attention, that's for sure. So that's all I know for now. So I will let you go, and we'll talk to you later. Thanks. Bye.